Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today we're going to continue the series, Is That an Analog in Your Pocket? Are you just happy to see me? And today we're going to be taking a look at the new beta for the Narc core from Midway. Pramod is one of the developers of this, and he definitely did a great job bringing over one of Midway's most infamous games. It is a fun game, but I think it's more well known for just being ultra-violent and kind of piquing the public's interest back then versus actually its gameplay. But it does take place in Chicago, you know that's where I live, so anytime a Chicago game comes up, I get a little extra excited to talk about it. Before we get far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But Narc is one of those games, if you played it in arcades back in the day, it definitely made an impression. And as a kid, using these gigantic guns and all of these missile launchers just to watch all of the enemies in front of you turn into a pile of limbs and red mist was always a good time. And that was one of the things that Midway did that not a lot of other arcade developers would back in the day, is they threw that violence in the game. The main premise of the game is you're cleaning up the streets of Chicago from drug dealers, and honestly that's probably something that we still do today, maybe a little less violent, but honestly still a thing. And I do love the fact that this game has the CTA, or the L as we call it, going from Addison to California, the Red Line stop, which is basically 2 blocks away from my house. Not that particular stop, but one of them on the train line. So anytime Chicago comes through in a game, it's always fun. Now do be aware this core is in beta and it is not finished. There still needs to be some work done on burst RAM control on the RAM controller in and of itself. So sometimes if you see sprite flickering, especially if there's more than like 10 or 12 sprites on screen at once, that is to be expected. And this is still in beta, so you have to pop over to CoinOpCollection's Patreon page to take a look at that. I will leave a link to their main page in the description below, just so you can kind of see what they are working on, because I've got some other arcade boards in progress. But Midway is a fun developer, and honestly it's impressive it works this well already, because their hardware is absolutely some of the jankiest stuff around. I've got a lot of Midway boards in the closet, and honestly they feel like they're held together with duct tape and straight up dreams. And that's not a knock against Midway, their hardware which is always interesting, and compared to Sega or Capcom, I'm sure these things are an even bigger pain to actually reverse engineer. But what is on display here is working well, and of course this game has a very big sense of humor. I don't know where you buy beakers this big, but they do exist in the universe of Narc. The only thing I've never liked about the game, and I don't like about it in games in general, is having to actually attack the dogs. If you're a drug kingpin in Chicago, you probably own at least 1 or 2 lions or tigers, so just put those in the game. I feel less bad about attacking them versus hearing that dog yelp, but honestly that's just maybe one of those things that bothers me ever so slightly. But again, on the graphics, until you get to that SD RAM burst issue with some of the flickering sprites, everything looks great. The heads-up display, the result screen here, all of this in-car scenery and storytelling, it does come across really well. And according to Pramod, who I was chatting with before I did this voiceover, a track had to actually pop over to an arcade and do a little research on the board in and of itself to try to hunt down some bugs. And that's why it is so important to have real arcade PCBs to research against. And even though I keep offering anyone who will listen, no one's taking me up on the offer to borrow one of my Hyper Neo Geo 64 boards for an arcade core. And honestly, we don't have the hardware for that, but one day maybe you'll be able to play Hyper Neo Geo 64 and I can stop talking about it. But Narc is one of those games that is a lot of fun. You even get to drive a car, which is relatively ridiculous, and interestingly enough, I used to work in one of the buildings you can see in the background. I'll let you guess which one it is, but I always love when Chicago pops up in games. But this is just fun to have another Midway core, and obviously this research and development is going to lead to other Midway cores, things like Mortal Kombat, which you probably all know, love, and remember more than Narc. But leave me a comment down below and tell me, did you play Narc back in the day, or have you never heard of it up until the point in time which emulation became big? Because it's one of those things, I remember seeing this at my local arcade, and I did play it, so I was knowledgeable of it, but I've been hearing more about Narc in the last year because of the FPGA core than I ever did before. But that's not surprising at all, because a lot of people want all those Midway games. For me, stuff like Smash TV would be my total goal. Just so you guys know, it was Pramod working on this primarily, but Jose also assisted. I'm going to try to pronounce the next name in the credits list, dyreschlock. If I got that wrong, I'll leave it in the description below, because honestly, you know me, my pronunciations are always a little bit off. But the game has a fun soundtrack as well, so go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, and I'll come back and talk more about the history of Narc. fun music and creepy clown sound effects, and the sound is a little bit crunchy, but that was really a Midway thing back in the day. Their sound modules always had this sort of grittiness to it. Not sure if that's just because they were from Chicago, pun very much intended, but it's one of those things. Midway boards have a very particular sound, and that seems to be replicated relatively well across this core. And I know that Pramod was working on this sound module, tweeting about all the work done to that, because that is the interesting thing when you make cores for FPGA boards, or just basically work on anything in general. You have your CPU, you have all your video processors, the RAM, the sound hardware. There's so many different components that actually go into making an arcade board or any platform, and each one has to work well in conjunction with the other. And I do find it pretty funny and ironic that we are raiding a grow up right here where there is one down the street from my house right now. I could walk in like it's a convenience store and buy anything I want. So it is kind of hilarious, just the context of this game, what is now and is not permissible in Chicago and pretty much everywhere else across the country. Not trying to get political at all, I just always find it humorous. And some of these plants are apparently booby-trapped as well and will blow up on you. Never understood why that was, but it does it in the arcade board too, and it is pretty funny. And I will say the artist developers at Midway did some great animations for this game, although I'm not sure why we stroll this way when we walk around. Kind of feels like Saturday Night Fever and John Travolta trying to walk to the disco. He's got that strut on him, so definitely take a look at that sprite in just a moment. And again, it's always fun to get new arcade boards, especially when you have something where it looks like you're fighting against members of Devo. Seems to be a bucket hat there, but when you see them up close, I swear they're wearing Devo hats in this entire thing. And we're going into Mr. Big's tower here in just a moment. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what your favorite Midway game is. I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot of Mortal Kombat, and while Mortal Kombat's always been fun, it's never really been my favorite thing from Midway. If I had to pick a game that I love from them more than anything else, it would be Invasion the Abductors, but technically that just ran on their hardware and another developer did that as far as the development is concerned. But Narc was always a wild over-the-top game, and it definitely still holds up in that respect, and it definitely is a game that if you bring a second player, you're going to have an easier time of it, because they absolutely fill the screen here with opponents that you need to take out. So if one of you focuses on the left-hand side of the screen and the other focuses on the right, it is going to be an easier experience. But there is dip switches in the game to control all the different difficulties, free play, the violence level, everything that you would see on an arcade board. Just remember there's no options menu, so if you haven't really gotten to the arcade side of things recently, it is one of those items where you have to change everything via virtual dip switches when you're playing the game. But this is just another classic arcade game that definitely has legs and longevity, and it is a fun new core over on the Analogue Pocket side of things. And this core is going to definitely lead to some research. It's going to bring you even bigger and better games from Midway, because Narc is the first game to run on this board as far as FPGA cores are concerned. But again, I just enjoy this game for what it tried to do. Yes, the gameplay loop is pretty simplistic. You just go left to right or right to left. You shoot and blow up every single thing in front of you. You grab a key card and you move on. But I appreciated Midway always tried to do things differently than Sega, Capcom, Namco, and Konami back in the day. And they were not afraid to put that violence into the game and have those limbs fly around. And that's probably why this game is still the most well known, and probably why Mortal Kombat really took off to begin with in arcades. Those fatalities hooked people in, because the original Mortal Kombat is a decent but not incredible fighting game. It certainly got better in newer sequels, but honestly the original was still slightly flat in my opinion. But Midway's artists, Midway's developers and marketing team knew how to get a game into people's public consciousness and make it stick, and having Narc just be over the top in every way, shape, or form is definitely why we all remember it today. And if you didn't grow up in arcades in this era, maybe you don't remember it as well, but this was something, there was always a line for the arcade cabinet, at least at my local arcade growing up, and now that it's on Analogue Pocket and beta, I'm sure a lot more people are going to be playing it. But that's the fun thing about OpenFPGA on the Analogue Pocket side of things. People can bring over so many different fun cores. We just recently got a port of the Atari Lynx. We now have Narc, and I'm sure soon, maybe by the end of the year, maybe beginning of next year, you'll see another Midway game running on Analogue Pocket. But we have to go against Mr. Big right here. This dude in a wheelchair definitely has some Rise of the Triad vibes, even though the game came out first versus Rot. And honestly, they clearly don't share a genre. But Narc is here on Analogue Pocket. Yes, it's in beta. Yes, there's still some glitches, but getting things into beta, getting test results back, and then fixing up the core from there is basically the standard development process, so I'm sure it will improve quickly. But if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. But I'm done, and I'm going to go shoot Mr. Big, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.